Good evening. As you guys arrive, you should see a poll pop up, just a short one to fill out. And I'm just going to wait another minute or so for people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Welcome everyone who's just joined. If you could please just fill out that poll that popped up. And we're going to go ahead and slowly get the ball rolling here. Thank you for joining tonight. My name is Tal Kitron with Appleroot Tutoring Services. I'm a premium tutor and executive functioning coach, and I've been with the company for a little over 10 years. In various capacities, but the one constant is a lot of ACT and SAT and PSAT and LSAT tutoring. And then more recently, over the past few years, executive functioning has become a big thing. And so I've started coaching students, and that's really rewarding, challenging, and great work. So today we're going to talk just a bit about executive functioning, what it is. I anticipate this taking probably 40-ish minutes, and then we'll leave some time for questions. And as you have them as we go, just put them in the Q&A, and I'll get to those at the end. Without further ado, we'll get going here. So obviously, we first got to define what are executive functions. And executive functions are skills or processes, and we all have them. They are necessary for behavior control. Executive functions include things like goal setting, managing yourself and your resources in the moment, and also selecting behaviors and monitoring them in the interest of attaining the goals that you set. Within that, that's going to require organization, planning, prioritization, and then thinking through solutions, not just impulsively acting. So there's an impulse control element to executive functions. And again, these are skills that we all have, and they will naturally develop and improve over time, but we can also hone our skills through coaching or individually or with a group. We can develop our EF skills over time and improve them. So kind of a little bit of background on just what some of the main executive function skills are. You can see the 3 pillars down below. So the pillars of EF are working memory, which is how much we can hold in our brain at once, right? If you read a short passage on the SAT, there's only so long that we're going to hold that information before it kind of goes out the other side. Cognitive flexibility, so being able to adapt and think about different things in different ways, change, and kind of really we'll talk about metacognition, which is thinking about the way you think. And then self-control. So again, impulse inhibition, prioritizing, staying organized. And so we have these, and it's a spectrum, right? So you may be, or your student may be really great at planning. They've got their goals, they plan ahead, they've got a timeline, we're organized. But then when it comes to prioritizing in the moment, like when something's due, they'll procrastinate, they won't manage their time well, right? Or someone may be very, very good at attaining their goals, but they're not very good at monitoring and regulation, so they always find themselves procrastinating, doing it at the last second. And again, these skills, we all have them. If you don't do anything, any sort of coaching or any prep, like naturally our executive function skills generally develop, at least until like mid-20s, if not beyond. So for high school students, absolutely, we're still developing these skills, but with a bit of coaching and focus narrowing, you can do it much more quickly and more efficiently and effectively. So, if you're starting off a fall semester and there's going to be some final exams that are tough, or you've got an AP class or 2 or 5, these skills help, right? Planning ahead and being able to manage your time, that's going to help you prepare for those tests and succeed. And it also just helps in life in general, right? If you find yourself always being late to events with friends, right? Just a little bit of EF coaching and skill development can change that too, for the better. So just to reiterate, I mean, these skills are highly transferable. They really do generalize to most areas of life. That's logical, right? We plan and prioritize and need to be organized for a lot of things. And generally, the reason that I'm doing EF coaching is because a student is missing assignments or missing appointments or just not being organized. So if we cultivate those skills and say, all right, well, I've got this C in Spanish and I want to get it up at least to a B plus. We think about why is it a C? What can we do differently? And then we always find that these skills transfer over. So like just because now I'm better at my prioritization for Spanish doesn't mean that's all it helped with. It'll carry over into work, personal hobbies, most activities generally. I've never done coaching for an adult, but I know that we do. And honestly, if I had known about it, 10 years ago, I might have wanted it, because I think a lot of us struggle with certain skills. And again, someone might be really strong in one, not in the other. So it's all a balance. But EF coaching is really for everyone. Most of our students that we see are sophomores or juniors in high school. And sometimes they stick with you, right? And then like you're coaching them through the transition to college as a freshman, which is a very cool and different thing. I mentioned metacognition, which I believe is really a cornerstone of executive functioning. Metacognition is thinking about the way you think. So if you're really a good metacognitive thinker, you're able to reflect, you're able to understand what's the best way I learn. I have a lot of students with learning differences, so maybe dyslexia or ADHD, and I really want to trust them because they often have very good metacognition and they know when they need help, what works and what doesn't. Right? Even something as simple as knowing when you need a break and not grinding for an hour on an assignment, but doing 40 minutes and a short break, and knowing when to use certain strategies, like that's all part of this. And we can't really develop it unless you start to think about past experiences, right? Of what's going really well and maybe what isn't. That comes back to self-awareness. So thinking about, well, I didn't get a good grade on my final exam for AP Bio, and let me trace back as to why. Because I remember I felt pretty good throughout the semester. Maybe I just I was overconfident. Or now that I think about it, I scheduled, there was a concert I went to earlier that week. And honestly, in hindsight, if I hadn't done that, I would have had better rest and done better on the test. It can be as simple as that. And then just the first step one is acknowledging, and then you work to kind of correct or change that. So you want to understand what are your strengths, but not just strengths, also weaknesses. And you want to understand vulnerabilities and challenges. And I really will emphasize the strengths because, as you can see from this quote here, if you know what you're good at, you're going to be much better off than knowing what you're bad at. There's like a quarterback controversy in the news this week where a quarterback said his former coach was really hard on him, was a terrible person. And mostly because he told him, you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough, as motivation. But in sports, in life, in school, positivity is almost always going to be better motivation. So like if we're doing ACT prep, I'm always going to emphasize here's what is going well, right? If you just harp on what's bad, it's depressing, it's unmotivating, right? So very, very important to highlight not just what I'm struggling with, but also what I'm strong with, because everyone has their own strengths. As a coach, but also as a parent or guardian, or as a student yourself, you can teach yourself to look back, and in doing that reflection, that can help you move forward. So that self-awareness is really this practice of curiosity. We're always coming from a place of curiosity in executive function coaching and just trying to develop these skills. So, hey, we had a really good result on this last quiz. How did that go and why? What could I have done better? What can I learn from this? A lot of it is let's dig into that, right? Or tell me about that, right? And you'll be surprised what insights students will come up with on their own, because usually they know why something went well or not well if we really dig into it and think about it and talk about it. So I think a big part of this will just be getting students comfortable with reflection and learning from stuff that has happened in the past. very easy, I think, especially like in the parent and child relationship, for a bad result to become a failure that then is a lot of negative energy surrounding it. What is more helpful for developing EF skills and improving is to reframe that failure or setback or bad grade through curiosity and inquiry, not, oh, crud, we failed, but, oh, okay, interesting. Well, that's not what we were going for. Let's look at kind of what positives there were, and let's think about what didn't work. Failure is going to happen, and it's honestly, it's important. It's a good thing. We learn from our mistakes, right? That's why we take practice tests when preparing for SAT and other standardized tests. We make mistakes, we go over it, we learn, right? So like, I'm not cruel. I don't love it when my students make mistakes. I'm not like cackling, but in a way, it's a great teaching point. It's a learning opportunity. So in a way, it is good to make a mistake as long as you then see and think about why, right? How can I correct it and help myself later? So just be aware, we got to build this frustration tolerance, right? So it's not going to be like, I'm going to become better at planning overnight. I no longer need my phone. I'm not going to go on Discord or, gaming or anything like that. I'm fine. It doesn't happen overnight. You build these habits, and we're going to try some things as we do that won't work. And that's good. That's fine. All right. So coming from a place of curiosity, very crucial. Back just a little bit to metacognition and thinking about how you do what you do. So let's say we're talking about a class that's starting. If you want to succeed in this class or this year in school, you got to reflect about your prior efforts. And again, not just failures, also successes. Think specific, but also think general, right? So if we're talking about a final exam or an AP exam, on the one that went really well last year, what strategies did you use? How did you study, right? What did you do the couple nights before? How did those strategies help you reach their goal? And then what will you do again next time? What might you do differently? Right? So you've got all these positive things, and then in there, even if you did really well, there's usually or always room for improvement of some sort. So a lot of this is just self-reflection, being curious. And in doing that self-reflection, we will find out a lot about ourselves and about patterns. So based on our past performance, that would indicate to us whether we need to change how we prepare. Maybe we're not studying in the right place. There's too many distractions at home. We need to be in a cafeteria or a cafe or a library. Are you sitting down for 5 hours at a time? Is that working? And if not, maybe you need to do shorter blocks, which is better for almost everyone. Right. So these are all the kind of conversations we have either with a coach or in our head. Some of my students, a lot of times it's male students, athletes are often overconfident. And then a lot of my female students around junior or senior in high school sometimes are underconfident in math, even though they're amazing at it. And others are right on target, right? They know what they know, and it's about right. So just as a test taker, as a student, as a person, you want to be adaptable and be willing to shift and create a new pattern. So if the old things, the old routines are not working, embrace that. It's going to be hard to change, but it will pay off in the end. And sometimes even in the beginning. To become adaptable, I mean, some people really have that skill and are just can be a chameleon and can adapt, and others don't as much. They're kind of more rigid in their approach. So if we can teach a student or a child to be less rigid and more flexible, that can make a huge difference, right? Just because this worked for this teacher last year, even if it was the same type of math class, now you've got this different teacher, and they are looking for different things. It may not work as well for them. I do think that frustration tolerance, which I've mentioned, is a big, big thing. So try some things, get out of your comfort zone, and remember that making mistakes is good. It's okay. It's good. You got to throw some like wins in there too, because it can be very frustrating to just constantly be like, ugh, I'm struggling. I'm not learning. It's not perfect. But building that tolerance is a really helpful tool, right? We can't just think everything's always going to go perfectly. It's not realistic. this is generally known, but it's something I've certainly witnessed as a school teacher and then as a tutor and coach. Students with low executive function skills. So if a student is maybe not the best at planning, or they're just very unorganized, right? So they're turning in stuff late, they're missing stuff. That often presents like to teachers and others as being unmotivated. So I remember seeing students that I would think like, man, you just don't care. Like you're always late, you never turn anything in, you just don't care. And then I would talk to them and I'd realize, oh, it's not that you don't care, it's that you don't understand and you're afraid of like either embarrassing yourself or like doing something like asking questions. So a lot of times what it is just a lack of skill, not a lack of will. So you don't, as a teacher, I think it's really important, but really also as a parent, if you see lower performance, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, they're falling behind, um, or they don't care, right? It might just mean, wow, this subject is pretty tough, or it could mean a bunch of things. I just don't, I would say if you see lower executive function skills, don't assume that it means low motivation. It's usually not that. If a student gets a couple wins, right? So like, let's say they're struggling with US history, right? They're just like, we get the one assignment, we can do one assignment, we do it perfectly, we turn it in, we get an A. That will increase motivation because then the student realizes they can do it and it feels good, right? So get a couple, build the frustration, but get a couple wins in there too to build motivation. This is my philosophy as both a teacher and tutor and a coach, which is I always want to give the student the first crack. I don't want to be the guru, right, who says, you know, this is how you do everything and, you know, and rely on me. That is not helpful in the long run. I want to ask them, what ideas do you have? Where do you think we should start? Catch me up on the last week and tell me what your biggest concerns are. And then I can help break it down, right? We'll lay it out, we'll put it in a spreadsheet or a document and make sure that it's structured and we know what concrete tasks we have. But I don't want to be like the guru. Like I said, we're partners, we're teammates. The students got to take the initiative. So as a coach, I'm going to teach them the invaluable skill of problem identification. What's my problem? Right, exactly. And then how to generate and then implement a solution. Easier said than done, but if I'm trying to tell them, here's how you should do it, not only is it maybe not the best move because I don't know every particular, but it's also just not, it doesn't ring true, right? It's not actually teaching. It's just here, mimic what I'm telling you to do. So for EF skills to really develop, you need to take your own initiative and also bring your own ideas to the table, right? Don't just rely on someone else to help. So just, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think most of the rest of the slides are honestly just about things that we can do as students and various aspects of executive function where I think most students lack or many lack and can develop both in the short and long term. So like first, just with planning ahead is one of the biggest things. And I mean, starting now, right? If you've got 5, 6 classes and 3 of them are APs, right? Start now, look at when the tests are, look at the syllabus, make sure you know what's on them, right? And then just generally you want students to think about how they do what they do. So not just like we break it down very, very definitively in the first session. It'll be like, okay, so where do you keep your assignments? And the student might say, oh, I just have a notebook. You dig into that more. Okay, so do you have a different notebook for each subject or is only one notebook? If it's only one, how do you separate each class? And that'll kind of trigger them to realize, oh man, maybe I don't have the best system yet. So if we're talking about then a specific test, right? And let's say it was for this one, we'll use a math test that we got a B on, but we're an A. I'm an A student, and I should have got an A, and I want an A in the class, but now I have a B. So how do you help someone become more self-reflective? These are some questions you ask. All right, what was your goal? You wanted to get an A. How did you prepare? Where did you start? And they may say, I reviewed my notes, which is good. What strategies did you use? Well, I reviewed my notes and my book, and I looked at the problems we did. Did that strategy help? Yes. Reviewing my notes and my book gave me like a bit of refresher on things I needed to know. But then thinking about, okay, but why a B, not an A? Maybe what I didn't do was I didn't write out the hard questions and redo them. So I didn't get enough of my actual testing of myself. Or maybe I thought, hey, this unit is going to be more heavily tested and this one won't, so I didn't study as much, and I ended up being wrong. So now you know that the teacher might pull that again, and next time you'll use that to your advantage. You'll study each part, not just that one topic. The goal is often a short-term objective. So like, I want to get a good grade. I want to make sure that my final exam is solid. I want to get a 5 on the AP. But with all of executive function coaching and developing, it's about long-term, right? So even if it helps in the short term, we're trying to build skills for life and for school and beyond. So I mentioned we have to highlight all the positives, no matter how small. So it might not be, if we're aiming towards an A, but we have a C. Well, hey, just getting a good grade on a paper, getting a B on a paper, my grade might still be a C overall, but that is a win. And students often only look at the big wins. So if we can just kind of say, hey, this was important, right? You not only did you get this done, but you also did 8 other things this week, and you acted in a play, and you helped your sister with this. Like, every little thing like that can be a win and can help build self-esteem, but also help really just help students understand, right? I'm not that far off of where I need to be. And then as you direct the attention to the wins, even say like, hey, look at what you did here and look at how it helps, right? You started studying on Tuesday, not Thursday. And because of that, when you had a question on Wednesday, you were able to go to office hours, right? And that was a really nice thing, helped your grade. So reframe those small victories, even incremental wins and successes, as big wins. Right? We're aiming towards our goal and we're getting there. Along those lines, don't assume that anything is too simple to explain. Because to me, if I said, all right, well, put this meeting in your calendar, it's very obvious. I enter it into my Google Calendar on my phone, I put it in there, and it's there. A lot of students will have no idea what I'm talking about if I said put it into your calendar. What's a calendar? Do you mean like write it down somewhere? And sometimes maybe you do need a printed calendar, but we might have to flesh that out and just say, all right, well, here's the first thing you got to do is figure out if the calendar app on your phone is good enough, or if you need to download a different app, or use Google Calendar, which is what I use. Here's how you add a meeting. Here's how you invite someone else to a meeting. Here's how you schedule repeat meetings, right? That's actually one of the biggest things early on, is just get students on the phone calendar and start scheduling in commitments and even break time, play and work. It might seem effortless to you to say, all right, make sure your backpack is free of clutter and just has only what you need. Some people have like ridiculous amounts of stuff, random things in their backpack. They've never emptied it in 3 years. So that person, it's not going to be on like their mind at all to do that. You have to really say, okay, here's why, here's how, right? And here's what we do need. Again, you also want to be asking questions to get there if possible. So, hey, how's that working for you? What do you do? Is there any time that has not worked? Or do you feel generally pretty good about that? And then you can really tell where there are breakdowns and how to help fix them. Here's just another like explicit questions, very specific questions you can ask. So not just where is the homework, but where in the assignment book, which page, how do you separate this subject from another subject? So every step should be manageable. That's what a really good coach does. But I think it's tricky, right? The parent-child relationship at like the age of students I'm usually working with is tough. So sometimes it comes better from a tutor or a teacher or a coach than it would from a parent, right? It comes from mom or dad, it falls on deaf ears. But if this kind of stuff and making each step discrete and manageable comes from a coach, I think it makes a big difference, right? It doesn't feel nearly as overwhelming. Aside from planning, no matter how well you plan, you have to also prioritize. This is one of the biggest things that my students tend to struggle with. A lot of students do. So even if they know that a certain grade is more important, they might save that assignment because, I don't know, it's less fun, or they're worried they won't do well. We need to prioritize critical tasks and then allocate just more time and energy towards them. So let's say you're starting up fall semester, you've got a bunch of finals and AP tests that you know are going to come up at the end of the year or semester. You're going to need to prioritize. So that's where the calendar comes into play. I want to have those tests on my calendar now so that I can kind of set myself up for success the few weeks before. Maybe Spanish is your thing and you don't need to really worry about Spanish because you're way ahead of everyone, you're very confident. So we don't spend as much time on that, right? Maybe it's fun because we're good at it, but we don't want to spend as much time. And then maybe I'd say chemistry is not my favorite thing, but that class is really important. I want to go into engineering or science, so those math and science grades are important. So maybe that AP exam or that final or that class would deserve more attention. It's all very logical, but people don't put the thought in, and so then they just treat things as they come in rather than prioritizing early. Prioritizing, planning, all the stuff is also very tied into motivation. And it's not motivation allows you to do things, it's usually the other way around. Setting goals, making tasks manageable, having little successes, those give us motivation. I am a big fan of writing things down, whether it's like we're writing down, essay prompts or we're writing down math problems to study, or just a goal, an intention, right? You write it down, it becomes a bit more real. It's not just wishy-washing around in our head. If there's a final exam and the syllabus lays out, for example, what types of questions, multiple choice or short answer, do we know how many questions we can miss and still get the grade we want? Right? So progress or a good score isn't the same for everyone, or good progress. It's calibrated based on your goal, right? What goals you set and then how far along you are towards achieving them. Just some tips now. I mean, something that I find a lot is students, they procrastinate, but then they're doing really long blocks of work. So like I would never do a 2-hour tutoring session. Some students I think seek it or tutors want it. I would online never do 2 hours, way too long. 90 minutes is perfect. Take a break in the middle, right? Even an hour is fine. If you're at home studying, you want to make sure that your place is free of clutter, both digitally and analog, right? So you've got a clear desk, you've got a good workspace, but also you're not constantly getting notifications popping up, right? So I think that's going to be huge. And then as you work, don't just work and work and work. Take short breaks, right? Maximum, you want to do like an hour at a time, but that's kind of a lot. And if you have ADHD, right, or you have processing disorder or any sort of learning difference, 30 minutes might even feel too long. So maybe it's 20 minutes on, 5 minutes off. If you can walk around, especially outside, really a helpful break, much more so than like being on the phone or just laying down. There's even studies that show that looking at pictures of nature, like looking at a rainforest video or picture, helps replenish your glucose stores and your cognitive function. So I'm very, very big fan of breaks. Sometimes you even have to build them in your schedule, right? So you're not studying for 3 finals in 2 days without taking breaks. So prioritize work, but then as you're doing that, you need to make sure you are giving yourself breaks. One way to do that is using clocks, watches, timers. Healthy boundaries with time. So you don't want to have it so you're only doing like 10 minutes of work, 10 minutes off, not productive. Too many interruptions and interference. Instead, you want to maybe have the stopwatch lap function on your phone if it's in airplane mode, for example, so we can't get distracted by everything else. But I can still put my clock on the stopwatch, and then every time I finish a question, I'll hit the lap button, so I know how long it took. Right, and if I get to 30 minutes or 50 minutes, I know it's time for a 10-minute break. I'll set that and then come back. The one thing you don't want is if you're taking breaks, you don't want to then like go into something totally different for like 20, 30 minutes. That's probably too long. So I think, yeah, 45 minutes on, 10 off is probably about right for like final exam studying, for example. Our goal is to make what is easy hard and what's hard easy. So like if I know that it's very easy for me to go on Instagram, it's very easy for me to text my friends. It's very easy for me to go online and look at the news. When I need to study, I need to make that hard. I need to charge my phone on the other side of the house. I need to turn it off. I need to put it on the other side of the room at the very least. So manipulate your environment so that it's easier to make the right choice and you don't fall into these simple distractions that are hard to avoid. That way, every time, like you're not saying, oh, every time your phone dings or is sitting there, you're not relying on willpower to like say, no, I'm not going to look at it, because it's a distraction if you're doing that. Our goal as a good student would be decrease the possibility of off-task behavior while we are on task. An important way of doing that is we got to learn how to inhibit distractions and off-task behaviors. This is a big challenge for a lot of people, not just students, I mean, adults too, right? I'm on my phone way too much. I'm checking sports scores and just whatever. So know yourself, know your standard distractions and time wasters. A lot of students, it's gaming. A lot of students, it's just messing around on social media. And sometimes that's okay, right? Like a decent amount of that can be healthy. You just don't want it to cut into your academic or life achievements. So think about where are you going to waste time? What are your well-worn tracks and how can we maybe change it? And a lot of it is just as simple as deleting Instagram from my phone or being in airplane mode or having the phone on the other side. There are also some blockers you can use for computer or phone. So here are a couple examples, but I would say if you look it up, you could just find one that appeals to you, whether it's about spending too much, like a certain amount of time on an app or not allowing it to be accessed at certain times. Yeah, lots of options there. And the biggest thing is just deciding that you want to do that. And it can be hard. It's easy and it's fun to just kind of mess around on the phone or go watch TV, whatever. As we cultivate good habits, you also want to make sure you're doing that for non-work activities. Healthy boundaries. When we're working, we're working. We need that quality work time. We also need quality play time. You have to build in interaction with friends or whatever is fun for you, whether it's sports or music, listening or playing, right? So just do make sure that you don't become like a automaton work robot where all you do is work and you're structured. You also have to use your skills to build in playtime. And then when you're doing something fun, you don't want to be distracted and like check your email and think, oh no, now I have this, right? It'll detract from the overall time. I mentioned this. So obviously the hard to access part, but also if you decide, hey, this part of EF is not easy for me, the planning part. So we talk about how can we make it easier for you? How can we make it better suited? What don't you like about planning? Is it the fact that you know there are more fun things? Or is it the fact that you're scared that like you won't be able, you have a fear of failure? You're scared that you won't succeed? And it could be anything, right? So you just have to dig into that with the student or on your own and think, all right, what about this isn't easy? And then what can I do to make it maybe more so? Unsurprisingly, procrastination is one of the most common things we see. So first item of business is why am I procrastinating and how? And for what? Is it only for tests or is it for papers or certain classes? And again, is it because I don't like this class and I'm afraid of failing? Or is it because I don't like this class and it's not fun? Or is it because I'm working outside of school too much? I don't have time. Or am I wasting time on something that I don't need to be? Or a combination of the things. So examine that resistance, whether it's a conscious decision or something you're doing unconsciously. Think about where your go-to time sinks are. And then develop a plan of how you can counter it. So when you find yourself doing that, you need to be able to catch yourself and say, "Uh-oh, procrastination. I'm doing this again. So what did I say that I was going to change?" Sometimes that's through rewards or punishment, right? So if I go 2 days without looking at my phone during my homework, then I'll allow myself on the third day to do that, right? And then maybe you can kind of build some sort of longer time when you're not doing it. Some people do better with rewards, some people do better with punishment. So think about what is more motivating to you. But I will say overarching is don't save the hardest thing for last. It is very tempting to, but if you can do at least some of the hard things first, this is even true on like a standardized test. Sometimes you jump around, go do the hard questions, and then at the end, you do the last ones as a reward, right? So that can be a strategy for some people. And then finally, help seeking is something that I've noticed people in general are not very good at in today's society. So as a student, just know that like when I was a teacher, I always loved it when students asked for help within reason, or just asked me for clarification. It showed that they cared. It showed motivation. It showed interest, dedication. So attending office hours, great way to show that and to learn whatever you need to. Don't be afraid to email your teacher. Some teachers are more approachable than others. The worst that can happen is like you don't get a response basically. But if you're emailing just saying, you need clarification or you need assistance on something, know the time and place, but that's something you want to do. Maybe studying alone is not for you. You need a study partner or a small group, so you can seek that out. Tutoring, of course, obviously, is our bread and butter, but it's there for a reason. You can learn how to game the system. You can understand a certain test or a subject, and then all of a sudden, you're not struggling in a class you were struggling. The way to advocate for yourself will change from person to person and situation to situation. But step one is recognize when you need help and then thinking about how to do it. So you want to identify the people to ask for help. Maybe there are certain administrators or teachers or parents or friends of parents or friends. And then the right time as well. So maybe not the day before the final exam or the day after office hours, but the week before. And that's where smart scheduling and a system on your phone and a computer and even on paper can make a difference. This is a tool that many EF coaches uses, those really big calendars. They have you print it out, right? And you can mark it up. It's a very good tool. Parents often use it for younger kids, then we stop using it, but it's a really good tool for a lot of people. So if you're not just satisfied with phone calendar, because that does require you to be on your phone, printing it out, having a daily and weekly and monthly list of what we need to do makes things more clear. And I'll just say it again because it's a lifesaver. Google Calendar really just put everything in there, right? Whether it's a dentist appointment or it's a final exam or it's a football game or a birthday, right? All that stuff is important because then you can plan around, prioritize, and then schedule in work and playtime. This is what it might look like this is probably like a college final exam schedule, I would guess. But look at this here and like how you can schedule in not only your tests and your study time, but you've also got time for lunch. That's important. Time to take a nap or get some coffee. This person will have a structure and then they won't find themselves spending 8 hours the night before the test trying to cram and getting only 2 hours of sleep. Those are the situations you want to avoid. And unfortunately, the situations that a lot of students find themselves in pretty often. We have reached the end of our presentation. This is the number that you can call if you're interested in executive function coaching or tutoring or test prep. You can request to work with me, although I'm pretty busy, but I always try to make room for requests. And I want to open it up for questions. I also want to launch one more poll. I'll go back to that previous slide in a minute. So you'll see a poll come up in a moment. And then if you do feel like you are satisfied, you've got what you need, hopefully it was helpful, feel free to take off. Thank you for joining. And anyone who has questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We've got some time, and I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts you might have. Most coaching sessions are about 30 minutes a piece. Your goal is to start with like 2 sessions per week, probably, or maybe 1 per week. And then you want to ultimately expand that to once every 2 weeks and then once every month as the student has more control over their executive functions and a better feel for how they're doing. Got a couple questions. So the first one is this session just to encourage getting a coach? I thought the webinar was to provide practical skills we can implement. Well, hopefully you found some practical skills, right? Which would be decluttering your environment, metacognition, all that stuff. Certainly did not mean it as you should get coaching. I think there should have been a lot of tools here that you can use on your own or with family and friends. So yeah, I would say that. A couple other questions. My child spends many hours doing homework. Can you provide some tips on improving study time? So yeah, I mean, probably what is happening is the homework study time isn't as efficient as it could be. So usually if students are spending hours and hours on homework, it's because there are distractions coming in, right? So I would check on that first and say, okay, so are you really like, do you have your controlled environment, well lit, decluttered, and are you really doing work while you're working? And are you building in short breaks? Because not only is it not healthy to do really long blocks of work at a time, it's also very likely that that person has distractions coming in. So better to build in an hour or two to just do something fun, not work, and then have a healthier boundary when you do start working. So yeah, I would say the biggest tip I have is just make sure you're inhibiting distractions and you've got a good study area. Next question is, sorry, my dog is barking because my wife's coming home. Next is it too late for a high school senior? Which I assume the question is it too late to develop EF skills or get coaching? Certainly not. I mean, it's never too late for one thing. But also, I would say high school senior is a really important age and time where you're going to transition into college soon for a lot of students or the next chapter of life. So you really do want to have those skills in place. You want to know like how are you going to adapt to this brand new situation. So I think a senior in high school is probably primed for EF skills, right? And there's a lot of important things happening as well around that time, college apps, etc. Next question is, if your child's more visually oriented, are there some other tools to help get them organized? That's a really good question. I would say the big calendars are definitely a good thing, right? So having the calendar, having things written, that's going to be really, really important. And then probably writing things out a bit more. So I would have to, meet them like I think a good coach would share their screen, right? So everything they're saying, they're typing up. And I think the main thing would be if they're visual, they want not to keep it all in their head. They want to have it written down, right? So lots of stuff on paper, whether it's tips, tricks, reminders. So I would, or just even a calendar, a schedule of events. Yeah, I would say making sure you got it on paper for the most part. Next question is, what about ADHD students? I work with a lot of those, more probably for test prep than for executive function. Biggest thing is if my student has any sort of learning difference or accommodation in school, like an IEP or 504, I trust them. I mean, I always trust my students. It's very important, but I especially trust my students with ADHD on what works and what doesn't. They often haven't thought about it very hard or really like put that into play. But when they do, what we usually find is typical strategies that work for some people, like just sitting down and really focusing in for 40 minutes, might not work for someone with ADHD. And if you have extended time on a test, a lot of times it's a blessing and a curse because, hey, now I have enough time to finish, but now I'm here for 5 hours instead of 3. So I think my biggest advice for ADHD students that seems to come into play is scheduling the breaks, but making it a healthy, limited break. So not I'm going on my phone, but I'm taking a short walk, I'm getting a snack, I'm stretching, right? That's the kind of thing I would build in is like healthy boundaries, work and play, but making sure that you're not just working because it's not going to be effective for someone with ADHD just to work that way. But yeah, really just trusting what has gone well for you in the past is going to be big. Let's see. Next question I have here, a lot of good questions, is what if your child just doesn't really care that much about doing better in school? So remember that we talked about how sometimes low executive function skills present as low motivation. So if you do some digging, it might just honestly be, well, I don't feel confident or competent enough to do this, or to succeed in this class or to succeed in this school. So a lot of times if someone doesn't care, it's not just, oh, I just want to have fun, I don't care. More often it's this feeling of a skill deficit. It's feeling like, yeah, I'm falling behind. So maybe you give them a couple successes, a couple wins, right? And that can turn around. I've seen that hundreds and hundreds of times, but it's tough, right? Because if they present as not caring, then what can you really do besides kind of, I think, dig in a little bit and think, is it actually motivation or is it skill? Let's see what else we got. All right. Next one is, do I have specific suggestions or strategies for the various skills? I mean, yes, like planning would be the calendar stuff, Google Calendar and hard copy. Prioritization, you actually have to sit down and think about it. What's my goal? Where am I struggling? So prioritization comes with where am I doing well, but also like what do we care about the most for our future goals? I would say a big part of this is writing stuff out. So the future you sketch. So you're basically planning from the future backwards to set yourself up for an efficient and not overwhelming game plan. But all of this, honestly, it's specific to the person. So it depends on whether you're lacking in one area or the other. The general rule for everyone is that curious framing and just asking some questions will get you there. So you learn a lot in a first meeting or just talking through it about where a student feels they're really strong and where they're not, right, where they might need help. And on that note, how can a student know where they're strong on the skills and where there are opportunities with the executive function skills? That is tough. It requires thought, right? That's the metacognition. So you have to reflect. The way to know would just be think back, right? So think back on successes, what you did right, and think back on failures. And you'll find patterns, right? If all the failures are because I didn't study until late the night before, that was probably planning and prioritization. Whereas if I know that my backpack is cluttered and I keep missing assignments, then organization is where I need to focus first, right? So it's usually pretty obvious once you dig in just a little bit. Tough one here. The biggest distraction is the laptop, which he needs to use for homework, what to do about it. So probably, honestly, some of those blockers are going to be helpful. Just app blockers. You may need to like delete some shortcut icons, at least on the homepage. Sometimes like doing something little like that, where you have to go a different way to access Reddit or whatever it is that you're going onto the computer, even if it's just like a more circuitous route, that can be a reminder to the student, crap, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm supposed to stay on task. But that is hard, right? If you use the laptop for homework and that's your distraction, that's a tricky thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, ideally it'd be get a different device, but that's not always an option. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it's just make sure that when the student's on the laptop doing homework, it's only in one spot and this is my work spot. If I'm somewhere else in the house, the laptop can be used for fun, but not here. So trying to kind of figure out if that structure would work. Thank you guys I'm glad it was helpful, informative. I really appreciate that and glad that you enjoyed it. Last question that I have here is, are the coaching sessions via Zoom? Generally, yes. We have tutors and coaches in certain markets in person, like in Atlanta and in San Francisco and in other places. But everything I do is by Zoom, both for tutoring and coaching. And so, like I said, you usually coaches would, in my experience, you start with 30-minute sessions once or max twice a week. And then pretty soon you want to then expand that to like once per week, and then maybe once per couple weeks as the students becoming more confident and in control of their ES skills. Whew, good questions. Got one more coming. Okay, here it is. So my son's in college and doesn't think he needs to use these strategies. Any suggestions on how to convince him? Yeah, that's tough. I mean, college students are notoriously hard to reach sometimes, right? But I think the first thing would be like maybe let them know what these skills are. Because when I was in college, it wasn't a big field yet, but I certainly didn't know what executive functioning was. So first, making sure they know what it is, and then like I think probably the best way, just thinking personally, would be in conversation or maybe by email, figuring out like what is it that we lack, right? So is it just for a lot of people in college, they lack the impulse control. That's the biggest thing because we're all of a sudden we're out on our own and we don't have anyone, making sure we're awake and going to class. We have to do it. So if I wanted to just roll back over and go to sleep, or I wanted to go do something different, I could theoretically. So I think the impulse control thing is probably the biggest one. And just showing the person, showing the student, hey, like these are things that can be helped. You don't have to just kind of fall into this trap. So if you can get that person to reflect a bit and think, I guess it is true that like I'm not amazing at controlling my impulses, but they're knowing that there are ways to help. It's a very tricky one though, because like I don't know, if I was at college and my mom called and said, hey, you need to do this, I probably would brush it off. Maybe if I was home for Thanksgiving, I would listen more closely. But yeah, that's just a tricky one. If he already knows what it is and he's had executive function, then it's really just about, well, hey, do you remember why you had it? Right? What did you get this tutoring for? And of course, I'm imagining it was helpful at some point in high school. And then just say, well, think about your situation now. And it's not different, it's the same. And it's almost harder because now you don't have usually parents at home pushing you a little bit. You're all on your own. So I would say frame it from that point of, we're really proud that you're out here doing this on your own, but to really make the most out of this opportunity, based on your experience in the past, this works. This is not just a high school thing at all. A lot of people do it. And I mean, our executive function skills are improving naturally in the 20s and 30s, right? So I would say mostly that. I would say just figure out if you can get to what's the struggle in college, and then here's how this has helped in the past. But yeah, tough sell. And then last one coming in is, what advice do I have for super quiet and shy child who won't advocate for themselves? That's hard. And I have a lot of students like it, right? So I think maybe number one would be dig into the fear a little bit. So like, what are you, and there's gonna be pushback, but like I would ask the student, so what are you most afraid of happening if you advocate for yourself, or if you ask this question? Am I afraid of looking silly? Am I afraid that I'll annoy somebody and put them out? So trying to reframe it as like, for example, if you want them to ask a teacher for something, the teacher's job and what they're doing, if they're a good teacher, which most are, is they're passionate about educating. And so if a student advocates and asks for help, a good teacher and a person who acts appropriately will respond in kind and appropriately. So I would say, I think my short advice for that is try to show that there aren't really, like, the downside is not big to advocating for help, and then try to show all the positives, right? So, and then making it seem like, hey, these people are approachable. Teachers aren't going to be mad when you ask questions. They're going to be pleased. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I really appreciate all these really great questions. Hope you guys learned a lot, and good luck with this semester and beyond.